We're going to remove the upper part of the valve body here. First thing that happened was when I went to take this off, this nut was already loose. This is your shift linkage here, and this nut was loose. So that could have been a real problem if that would have come off. So we're going to take that off. This screen just has a rubber grommet. Take that off. And we got a nut here and a lock washer and a bolt and a lock washer. This is a retainer. Take that off. We now have a spring, a tube with an O-ring. Okay, that's off. I've already taken all these bolts off, and I wanted to mention that this hole right here had a copper washer. The rest had lock washers. So I'm going to look in the book and see if that is correct, because this very well could have been a part before. So I gently lift that off. As you can see, there's another plate. Here's our spool. A couple Phillips head screws there that need to come off. Another gasket, and there'll be some other parts in there. Probably a check ball or two. Remove this gasket carefully as I am saving these, just so I can compare them with the new ones to make sure they're cut properly. You see there's a spring here and a little check valve, and that's the lower part of the valve body. The next step would be to remove the rest of it. I wanted to show you, to take these off right here, these screws were loose. Now that's not a real big deal because they're clamped together with everything else, but I just thought that was interesting to note that those screws were finger tight. So you never know what you're going to find when you take stuff apart. It's always good to note what was loose, because if it's a critical area, you may want to put a little dab of Loctite on. And another gasket. We got another little check valve here. It actually looks to be in good condition. And the next thing I'll do is I'll be pulling these spools out, and this other spool here, and taking a look in there. Got all the bolts out for the upper valve body, and I've taken out the little check valve. Now this shifter rod's going to pull through there, and we'll see what we have. Got a lot of oil. Okay, there we go. You can see our bands here and our adjustments. And our servos are right here. So the next thing would be to disassemble that and take a look inside there. Alright, I just took off this upper cover here. Yeah, it's the upper valve body cover. I'm going to take off the gasket. Alright. And now we have lots of little screws here. I just want to see if these are loose. Okay, these are tight, so I'm going to have to smack those. Oh, there's one loose one. Not real critical. Oh, there's one that's been damaged. This has definitely been a part before. Somebody's been in here before because they really messed that one up. So I'm going to have to get after those with the hand impact and see how that comes out. I had to use my hand impact to knock these Phillips head screws loose, and as I before mentioned, that there's a couple that are not very good shape. This transmission is not a virgin. This thing has been apart, so that there's a lot of spring pressure on that from these pistons here. So hang on to it when you take that out. So These are the cup for the spring. Get that, set that to the side. And this one here. Okay, that's very unique. Get that one out of here. Okay, now I'll pull out the first piston, and if you notice how easy that came out. Yeah, there's definitely, those seals are shot. I can just push that in and out of there real easy. There's hardly any resistance. So this lip seal here is pretty much wore out. And that's the main reason we're going through this. To get it cleaned up, replace any worn parts, definitely all new seals, gaskets, and washers. A lot of crud is accumulated in that area because it can't get out. Let's see what this one's like. This one felt a little better. Had a little bit more suction to it there. But obviously, brand new seals are going to make a big difference in this thing. And this could very well have been rebuilt back in the late 50s or 60s. This car did come from Denver, so I would assume that there's probably some trips up in the mountains, and may have an effect on the, how long the transmission lasts or held up. One thing I see here, I've got another ball here. Now this one comes out. So this one's very important to get it back in that right spot. And I'm going to take a really close look and see if there are any more before I get carried away and dump this thing upside down. The last thing you want to do is lose a ball and not know where it goes. And we'll get this cleaned up and see what else it needs. I have the valve assembled. Get the two springs in with the seat, and the other valve, the bolt is tight. Got the shift valve here going. The next step is a little check valve here that slips in here, and there's several gaskets to come in the kit. You have to match them up. Don't throw away your old gaskets because it's very important. They all look the same. They open up different holes. Obviously, they're for different models or different years. So once you have that installed, you put the one gasket. You can match it up there, and then you're going to be putting this plate on here carefully. And then you have your little tapered screws. Now these were actually loose when I took this thing apart, those two screws there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put just a tiny dab of low strength Loctite on those threads, and like a blue, and we're going to tighten that down. I don't think they can go anywhere once you get it all bolted together, but I just thought that was kind of odd that they were loose. I don't think it really matters because once you sandwich it together, they can only back out so far. So anyway, that might be just simply put in there just for assembly purposes. So on to the next step. I've installed the small valve body onto the large valve body with just a couple screws, and I just snugged them because the whole thing has to be torqued after it's on. So I'm going to flip it over, and I've already slipped in my servo pistons, lubricated them. I got those slipped in there. Very important, this ball has to be right there, little check ball there. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but these are my little check plugs that I put in earlier on each piece. Okay, So once again, it's very important to save your old gaskets. And I matched these up with the old ones. So there's two different gaskets. So this is the correct one. I see I don't have a hole punched out there. I better fix that. I got a hanging shad here. There we go. So, and the next thing will be to put in those servo springs and the plate, which is right there, and the screws, and then I can continue on with that. I got the plate screwed on, got the servos in, got my check ball in place. You got to put quite a bit of pressure to put that thing on there. I haven't torqued them yet. I'm going to do that just about when I wrap it up. So that's basically the valve body, servos, and check ball. And I'll be on to the next step of actually mounting it on the transmission case. Okay, I had just trimmed this gasket edge here with the razor blade because it hangs over a little bit. Just got that done. And I also re-cleaned this surface because sitting around for a little while I got a little tiny bit of surface rust. And I cleaned that off with some 400 wet and dry sandpaper, some WD-40 and a rag. Got that all cleaned. I have my dowel pins here, and we're going to slip the gasket on here. And now, once again, remember I saved my old gaskets and I matched them up because sometimes they send you gaskets for more than 1 year make of car and they're slightly different. So I got that on there. So the next thing I'm going to do is to set on the valve body. One thing I wanted to point out here, I still have this this lever wired in with this wire to hold it down. If you don't, it's kind of spring loaded because it's pulling the band around tight. That little that little spacer bar down in here that actually goes between that and the band, it'll fall out and it's going to go inside the case. And then you're going to have to roll this thing around and try to fish it out. So that wire is going to stay on there until this is bolted on. I'll be able to get it off through here. And that wire's been on there since I installed that. So that's staying in the spot. So when I bring it down, now this side doesn't need it because it's not going to come out. So I just wanted to point that out. Having a little problem here. Okay. I'm trying to put my servo and valve assembly onto the main case. And I was wondering when I had taken this thing apart, I saw these little nicks. There's one here, there's one there, there's one there. And I'm trying to put it together and it didn't want to go down all the way. And I noticed that I thought these were, my clutch or band apply arms were too tight, and I backed those off, and that didn't do it. Then I realized this casting right there is sticking out into this area, and it's actually cocking this. This does have some give, so it's forcing it a little farther, but that's not right. That thing is held in there by this plate. There's no reason for this edge to be here, so I'm going to remove it. And to do that, I'm going to have to tape off this whole thing. I'm going to have to put some grease on my die grinder so we don't get filings, and get that cut off of there so this thing sits level. Okay, we're going to try to grind off this little edge here, and I've got everything covered up. I don't think I have to take it off very much. Well, I got the little edge cut off here. So now when the valve body plate, distribution plate goes on, it fit down nice. It didn't hit that anymore. But I had another problem. I'm over here and I'm having the same issue over here. It doesn't want to go down. And what I discovered, let's see, I don't know if you can see that in there. If you can see that bolt right there. See that bolt right there? Okay. In the previous steps, it tells me to bolt this back up, you know, to get my, to set my end plate and everything. I used the original bolts. The problem is I don't have a bell housing on here now. So all these bolts are basically going to be too long. But I don't know, these are the bolts that came out, but if you notice, it's contacting that. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to back this bolt out, and I'm going to have to find a shorter bolt. Now these are the ones, I had them all bagged, and they were in the right order, and that's a stud, that's a different size. I don't know if that was in there before or what, but these are the bolts that came out of this plate. And now that I see that, the bell housing only uses these bolts here. So that bolt was there like that. That's kind of scary because this is an easy mistake. If I would have bolted that valve body down, I could have cracked the valve body or caused a leak through the passages. I backed this out and the aluminum body fits on there just fine. So see if I can back that out of there. Good thing I caught that because that could have been really ugly to not catch that. So I need a bolt that's considerably shorter, good 1/4 inch shorter, so it does not protrude there. And I don't know if I might have mixed those up, but they were in the right bag and they were tagged for that front pump mount. So needless to say, I eliminated this problem over here, which has been there since the car was new. I don't know that it would have affected anything, but I trimmed that off. And now I'm going to have to find a different bolt for this. So you got to pay attention. You know, someone else has been in this. This is not a virgin transmission, so who knows? So you really got to watch and pay attention and look at everything, because the book's only going to tell you so much, and the rest is up to you. Put the gasket on. I got my studs back in there. We're going to drop this down back on there. You're going to line this up, and you'll attach that later. There we go. Kind of a straight shot here. Oh yeah, fits perfectly level now. It's not rocking and rolling, so I don't have a binding on this bolt here, and I don't have that edge there, a problem. So I'm happy with that. That's who knows, that might have been that way since 1955. The next step would be to install your little check valve here. Goes right there. Get our gasket on here. Okay. And there we go. Now this has been matched up with the old one. Well, we're ready to put on the actual valve body with the shifter valve. As before, I've got my gasket and I got my little check valve in there. Now one thing interesting about this is that you kind of turn this and line this up. Now the book is going to, when you read it, it's going to tell you to do exactly what I'm doing, but the picture shows something totally different. So that was a little confusing. I mean, if you're just reading along, and it's got a different picture for what, okay, we got that. I've already put in my bolts. They're various lengths. They all have lock washers. I didn't tighten anything. I just got them kind of turned in there. I took my dowel pins out. Now the one with the copper washer, the book shows it going right there. So that's where we're going to put that. And the longest ones go in the back here. And I've got all kinds of long ones here. And there. Now eventually I got to put this on, but they want you to do the torque first before you put your pickup tube in. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We've got to go through the torque procedure. It gives you specific torques for every bolt and nut. I got some nuts to go on here. So I'm just going to follow the book to the letter on that. Other than that, we're just about done putting that valve body on. We will still have to hook up the lever to this, but there's another adjustment before we do that. So we'll continue. I have all the bolts torqued, and the book says to be careful so this doesn't bind. Well, I found that even at the low end of the spec, it's snugged up quite a bit. It still, you know, moves fairly easy, but it's not like it was before it was bolted down. I really can't back off that spec anymore. I tried kind of different patterns and everything, you know, besides even what the book shows as a pattern. But I got them all torqued. Now what I have to do is remove these two here and then put in my suction tube and then retorque those two. So that will be the next. I'm getting ready to put in that suction pipe. Now the book calls for this cork gasket. That's what the book calls for, and that's what I got in the rebuilding kit. However, I took off an O-ring, and I'm sure that the previous rebuilder put an O-ring on there. Probably decided not to use the cork gasket. Now this cork gasket that they sent me is rubber impregnated. These are very good. I mean, I've not had any trouble with these in any application. And that's what I'm going to use, because I tried that O-ring. Actually, I took the one that was on off, I matched it up with a new one. It just doesn't fit that well. It doesn't center well. So I'm going with this here, and it seems to fit way better than the O-ring does. Fits in there real nice. And you got to remember that this thing is under spring tension. There we go. I mean, this spring is pushing hard down on that. So the chances of that leaking is pretty slim. So we're going back to the original stuff on there. And as you can see, this thing is really going to be tight on here. So what we're going to do here, get this thing started on there. And get this nut back on. This has got like almost like a castellated, but it's a lock nut. It's got this serrated top to it, and that's where that one goes. And we're going to put that back to the correct torque of what I had torqued it before. And it was at the lower end of the spec, so I think every transmission is going to be a little different, and every torque wrench is a little different. And my torque wrench here might be a little strong. So I started out at the lowest, and that seemed to work the best. There we go. So I'm basically following the book on that. There we go. So that's installed. So we're good there. And like I say, I don't really like it. It's a little stiff, but it's, I mean, I can easily move it with my fingers, so I'm not too concerned about that. And I think the next step is to hook up that shift linkage, and there's some adjustments in this area. I'm now ready to hook up the linkage that's down in here, and I don't know, you can see it right there, and I have to get that lined up. And I made a little hook. Whoop, wrong end. There's a hook. And I'm going to try to hook that thing and pull it up into place. So this will be fun. It was easy knocking it off. Okay, I got it. Now I just got to pull it. Okay, there we go. It is snapped in place. So now we're going to go over some linkage adjustments right now. One of the main adjustments that we're going to be talking about is your detent position and your parking lock pawl. And that has to be just right. And the adjustment is right here. You basically, this is slotted, so you can loosen this and you can actually shift that rod in there a little bit either way. And what we're looking for, it's going to be difficult to see it, but let's see, maybe that's a better angle. I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can see the little gear with the notches in it. That's your parking lock ring. There we go. And then there's a paw that drops into that. And basically what you're looking for is you want that all the way in and centered when this here, you can feel the detent. You can feel it. And I did that with this loose. I got this so I felt the detent, so it was at the bottom of the groove. And I gently moved this and watched in here until it dropped all the way in. And I got that as perfect as I can get it. It drops right in there. Now the next one, you're going to pull the lever 2 notches back, which is drive, on the valve body, and we're looking for, excuse me, let's start over. In park, you're looking for your 30 to 40 thousandths here. Now this spool's just a little snug, so there's a little slop in there. If you wiggle a little bit, it pops back a little bit farther. Yeah, there we go. So we're in that 30 to 40 thousandths range. And now what you want to do is you want to pull this back to drive. There we go. And what they're looking for is the end of the spool, the very end of the spool. They want it flush or at the most 1/32 either way, in or out. And I've got it almost flush, so with a little bit of slop in the linkage and everything, it's not going to be over 1/32 either way. So I think that's about as perfect as you can get it. And you make that adjustment right here. This is on a little slotted hole here. So you loosen these up and move that back and forth. So we got that. Now actually, to get this where I wanted it, I actually had to loosen these bolts back up and gently tap this valve body over a little bit to get it just, I mean, we're just talking, I mean, a 64th of an inch or a few thousandths, I don't know what it was, but it did make a difference, and it did bring this into a flush zone area. So I was pretty pleased with that. So basically this is all adjusted. Now if you screw up on these adjustments, not that big a deal. You can play with these adjustments from the outside while it's in the car, and you can take the pan off and redo that one, but it's better to get it as close to where you want it so you don't have to do that again. So I've done a little bit more fine tuning with this adjustment. And what the book is basically saying is, after I got this, the pawl, parking brake all adjusted, you want to get your, I think it's 30 to 40 thousand, something like that, here. Okay. Then, shift it into drive, And you want to look, and they're calling for like a 30-second either side of flush at the end of the spool here. So what I found was it was in a little bit too much. And if I would have adjusted this too much farther, I would have been out of the adjustment there. So what it tells you to do is to loosen your valve body. Just don't back them, back them off so they're still a little bit snug. Just gently tap a little bit on the valve body to slide it over just a fraction, and it did seem to help. So now when I'm in drive and I wiggle this, take the slop out either way, the spool actually passes from an innie to an outie. So that's basically as good as you're going to get because there is some slop. So I would say it's totally neutral. So I'm happy with all the adjustments here. This nut right here, when I took this thing apart, was loose. So I'm going to put a drop of blue Loctite on that and retighten it and check my adjustments again, because I really don't want that coming apart. So it looks like we're done in this section here until I get my screen back on, my tube, and the pan can go on. And then it looks like we're going to be working on a torque converter. So otherwise I'm pretty well pleased with how it's been going. I found a few boo-boos from the factory and possibly from a previous mechanic, but I think we've got those straightened out, so I'm pretty happy about that. Okay, I have the Dynaflow all set up for pressure testing, and I've already done my pressure test. Unfortunately, I made a big mistake when I was testing my rear pump. I had it in reverse instead of neutral, and what happened was I blew something inside the tranny. So now I have low pressure on reverse, but what I'm going to do is just record the pressures I have now, and then unfortunately I'm going to have to take the pan off and find out if I blew a gasket on the valve body, because it worked great up until the point where I checked the rear pump, and I was in a hurry, didn't check to see if I had it in neutral, and I didn't. I had it in reverse, and apparently it deadheads when it's in reverse and you're driving the rear pump. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and show some pressures. I'm going to go ahead and put it in neutral, and we'll see what we have. Now if you notice, I had 100 psi in front and rear pump because they are tied together. Okay, let's go to drive. We should have some pressure right here and on our front pumps.
I'm going to the foot doctor. I'll be right back.
Okay. You also noticed that I had pressure on my high accumulator, front pump, rear pump, and my stator. The stator is at the high angle right now. It's got pressure on it all the time. So what I'm going to do is try it again, and I'm going to kick off the high stator. Okay, you saw me kick off the high stator. It's now, oil's drained back. I also was showing 15 to 20 psi of lubrication cooling pressure there. Okay, now we're going to go to low, and what you're going to be looking for is almost 200 pounds on that one. So take a look at that. Now when I shift to reverse, what you should see is the same pressure on the front pump, also used as reverse. Should be the same as the low, and it was initially, before I made the mistake in the back here. So we'll look at that pressure. You notice I've only got about 110 pounds. So that's the problem. Now we're going to go to the back, and what I did before, I'm going to do it again. It's in reverse, and what I did the same thing, and I came back here to check my rear pump. Unfortunately, I was using the big drill instead of a 3/8 drive here, so I'm just going to turn this backwards. And what's going to happen is it's going to turn real easy, and it's going to get super hard, and I won't be able to turn it anymore. There, she just locked up. Now can you imagine I was doing that with the big man killer drill there, so I screwed it up. So now we're going to go back to neutral like we're supposed to do, and you should see some pressure on that rear pump. And you see it comes up really quick, and I'm just turning it by hand. And you notice my front pump pressure's bumped up a little bit here, and probably the check valve was opening. So, I had a perfectly good working transmission, and by not paying attention, I basically screwed it up. So now, I guess the next step would be to take all the gauges off, flip this thing over, I gotta get all the oil back out of it, and pull that pan and see which one of my valve body gaskets blew out. That's what I'm assuming happened. So, well, I've come to a possible conclusion of what happened and why this I lost my reverse pressure, and I want to show you a couple things here. This is my original gasket. This is my valve body, and I wanted to point out that this green area, this passage here and this here, that is the reverse pressure ports. So there is pressure exposed to those two ports. This is the gasket that I took out of the car, and this is one of the reasons I wish this was a virgin transmission. It was not. It had been into before, and I found lots of little problems. Let me put this gasket on, and we'll show you what's going on here. You can see right here, the gasket barely covers the edge. In fact, this one does a better job. This is the original one. See how it just covers there? Now I'm going to show you, this is the one I put in, which is an identical gasket. All the holes line up. You can see it barely covers that at all. So I think what happened is it blew out right here. It's so close to being to the edge that it's unbelievable. That's why I can't see a ripped piece of paper, because it's right on the edge. Now I dug around through my gaskets that I did not use, and I found this one. And you'll notice how this area is completely covered and not exposed like the other one was. So my mistake was this. I took out the original gaskets, I matched them up with the new ones in the kit, and I installed them. I was not paying attention. I should have caught this right here. Better now than after it's in the car. But as you can see, this gasket completely covers that area, and that is my reverse port. So I feel a little bit better about what had happened today with losing that half of my pressure on reverse, but I think I've just discovered it, what's going on here. So I'll get on the phone tomorrow, and we're going to order a lot of new gaskets again. And I'm going to ask specifically for the 55 your gaskets and see if it comes that's identical to this one. And then what that tells me is the person that worked on this before got the wrong gasket in there. Well, I now have my new gaskets for the valve body. And this is one of the reasons I was hoping to get a virgin transmission. I talked about that before. But anyway, because you don't really know if it was put together right in the first place. Even though it functioned, I didn't get a chance to drive this car a lot. So the gaskets that came out, the gaskets that came in the kit, and the gaskets that they just sent me that are supposed to be specifically for a 55, they're all slightly different. There's not one gasket that is identical. Some of the differences are insignificant. But basically what I've done is I very carefully, the best I can, I mean it's kind of confusing because there's a lot of ports that aren't used. I went through the book and I went through the gasket and make sure that all my passages that apply pressure, low, reverse, drive, the lube, etc. are covered properly. And I'm going to have to just try it because like I said, the gaskets that came out are totally different. The ones that came in the kit, nothing really matched up perfectly. They were close. Some of them were very close. Actually, the one that caused the problem right here on this valve body, it was an identical gasket. Why it didn't blow out earlier, I don't know. I must have deadheaded a little too much pressure but it would have happened eventually. So I'm going to have to go with like an educated guess here. I'm going to hope that they sent me the right stuff. It looks like everything's covered properly, but there are so many ports. And I did my very best to follow those through the service manual, which doesn't show very clear exactly what each port does. But we're going to go ahead and put this valve body together, and let's hope this time that I don't have any problems. We've now shifted to reverse, and what we're going to be looking for is our front pump pressure gauge will be reading about 200 pounds because it also shows our reverse pressures.